Developers.
Where are we as far as telco goes, and what are the big trends at the moment? That I'm having stepped back a little bit from your
Yeah.
well, what can you sort of say about that? Because I think you can say some things, you know.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at the telcos, they've been suffering.
Yeah. As they're not making money.
Yeah, as in they are not making anywhere near the kind of money that they had expected, given how large their investments are.
And when you said that means investment in 4G, 5G,
Exactly.
and also fiber everywhere.
Yeah.
It's just like
And
massive.
The simplest way to understand that is whether you take 4G to 5G or 3G to 4G and copper to fiber. I think everybody that listens to your podcasts gets a sense that those are massive investments. Yeah. But the price of a broadband doesn't change over time. Hasn't changed.
You almost get a feeling it's less.
Well, we can get back to that because there's a little bit of hope on the horizon, but we'll get back to that. But that is where the industry is right now. And that's why there's a need for consolidation, there's a need for continued efficiency, and so on and so forth. I would be a little bit of a nonconformist by saying that I believe there's hope on the horizon, because you are on the other side of those massive investments now. So 6G is not going to come until 2030, and for sure the investments in 5G are not completed. But the bulk of the investments have been completed. The bulk of the investments on fiber have been completed, for sure in Sweden. Sweden is in the high 90s in terms of fiber to the home. There are still MDUs for single dwelling units, so for standalone houses, that's the case. But for apartment buildings and building societies and so on, there's still a little bit to go. But the consumer preference for cheap internet has also waned a little bit. So people are seeing these as low involvement products, which they didn't used to be, and therefore they're not switching every time that they can save 50 SEK or 50 DKK and so on. And therefore we are starting to see some market repair, as we call it in telco, i.e. that prices are stabilizing and there is some recuperation of the investments. The numbers just came out for 2023, a full year 2023 in Denmark, and it's the first year for as long as anyone can remember that mobile prices didn't decline.
Interesting.
Okay. And we've been talking about market repair since 2000. We talked about market repair when I left TDC, and I left TDC in 16. Okay. So 8 years later, 16, 17, 7, 8 years later.
Why is this?
People just don't care. They just don't want to swap the SIM for another to save another, blah, blah, blah. Okay.
I remember you told me, I think, another time that you're saying that if you look at also compare the European market to the US, there's a big difference in profitability.
Huge.
Well, why is that?
Prices are much, much higher in the US. In the US, a lot of the broadband services still have a cap on them. And if you exceed the amount of data that you use, you have to pay extra for that. So the regulatory environment in the US is much more pro-business. Okay. In Denmark, up until recently, we've had 4 operators. Okay,
is that a lot? I mean, is
4 operators is a lot, so it's been, and you know that was it Telia and Telenor that tried to merge, and Brussels said no. I think it was. So no, it's in Denmark. Specifically in Denmark, and the regulatory environment has simply not allowed that. So broadband mobile is super, super cheap in Europe, and that's also spilled into obviously the B2B market. A big part of the B2B market is obviously mobile, as we know. So that's put a lot of pressure on the telco. But I think that there's light.
Interesting. So you think that it's sort of we're turning around and
but it's a financial argument. It's not, bandwidth continues to grow, right? Because I said that in the beginning of the podcast that I didn't believe that narrative. And bandwidth continues to grow, by the way, and it grows 50% a year.
When you say bandwidth grows, I mean the capability of the net to handle.
But people's consumption and so on and so forth, right? So people consume ever more bandwidth. We do.
But if you back a bit, what about sort of Ericsson, Nokia, Huawei? What do you? I mean, have you any view on that?
I think that there is room for 2-3 players in each of the sort of segments in the market, and you need 2 Western players in mobile. You have 2 Chinese players with ZTE and Huawei in mobile. I think the geopolitical concern about Huawei and ZTE, again, we have to trust that our governments want the best for us, and they've said repeatedly that they keep finding things that they're not expecting. And in some cases, including in Denmark, there have been orders from the authorities to swap out Huawei equipment. So I think despite, for example, Huawei's best efforts at trying to defend themselves, that there are just so many indications that something is not right. And for sure, whether we believe it or not doesn't really matter, because the legislation is what it is, right? Now, do I believe that the Americans would just as well leave backdoors in Cisco and in Juniper and so on and so forth? I don't think that's much of a stretch, okay? So,
and we talked at the beginning of this, we talked about European competitiveness contra US. But you said the big issue is contra China. What's your take on China at the moment? And
but the numbers just came out for 2024. Did you see their trade balance has never been stronger? Okay, so they're exporting more than, it surpassed $1 trillion, the trade imbalance with China. I just saw it in the New York Times this morning. Okay, so China is doing really, really well. And what surprised me is that the narrative that we've seen in the European newspaper, at least in the Danish and British newspapers that I read, has been very much, the housing crisis. Are they going to have another crisis, and the interest rates and blah, 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 blah. But listen, the production machines are running like never before in China. So I think the Chinese economy, the Chinese economy came out of 2024 in a really, really great shape, but that's the industrial economy. I think the question for Europe was, our belief until just a few years ago was that the US was going to lead the digital industry, China was going to lead the industrial industries, if you like, and that Europe was going to be leading in the green transition. And that has not panned out to be the case. It's not. Okay, and I think the big question is, why did Europe not take an obvious advantage in this area and continue to sort of expand on that?
And what's your take?
A couple of things. One is, we tend to not think as and again, Cognex's CEO was also in China, and he highlighted this, so I'll just echo what he said. They think 10 years ahead. They think 15 years ahead, right? Look at the auto industry and where they are, right? Volkswagen thought about electric vehicles as the only one, you could say. The Volkswagen Group thought about electric vehicles before everybody else, and it seems to be doing decent for them. But everybody else is running to Brussels and, can we delay this? Can we delay this? Can we delay this? And it's like, the writing's been on the wall. 6 out of 10 cars sold in Denmark are electric cars, okay? I know Denmark is not Sweden and there are other dynamics here, but again, we continue to be positively surprised by the consumer demand for green stuff, right? And Europe's industry has not been responsive enough to that. We can talk about Northvolt. I know also the Danish company Better Energy that just went into reconstruction has a Swedish private equity fund as one of their owners and so on and so forth. But there are some different dynamics specifically related to those. It's not a lack of a vision, or it is. It's not a lack of a vision that took these guys down. It's something else. But I think for Europe in the green transition, we really lost the opportunity to do something.
My general take is, looking at China, I think that we have to change the mindset in the sense that we have to learn from China.
Yeah.
I mean, there are, of course, lots of things that we don't want to do like the Chinese do. Yeah. But I mean, they're definitely, and Huawei is an example that, I mean, they do a lot of things amazingly well. If you talk to people in Ericsson and Nokia, and they're saying they're great, their customers are great, they're really, really good at what they do. So it's really important for Swedes and Danes and others Europeans to sort of say, what are they doing right? What are they doing right? How can we sort of learn? In the same way we look at Silicon Valley, we sort of say, what are they doing there? What are they doing so well? How can we sort of take what's good there and bring it? And I think we should.
And did you know that Huawei, just because you mentioned them, that they are a major player in solar in photovoltaics?
They're extremely innovative in lots of areas, which is just amazing. I mean,
there's a huge market here. Let's start looking at it.
They're doing the chips and everything. It's so of course you need to look. How can they do it? Coming from a system that's of course, and the Chinese system does have lots of sayings you just understand that obviously sometimes go massively wrong. Yeah. But I mean, how can you sort of see? How can they have the? And I think that's interesting. But you generally, so if you look at sort of a more Nordic Danish perspective or Swedish Nordic Danish perspective, what are you sort of positive about the Nordics? Or are you worried about what's sort of?
I am and this gets to my second role, right? Yeah. And now, so after the soul searching, I started, and you know this because we talked about this before getting on the podcast, but I went back to study green energy. So I'm an online student at the Technical University, the Danish Technical University, and studying green energy. And looking at the numbers, I would say the number one characteristic that you need to have is just positivism. Because it's so easy to get depressed looking at the numbers, particularly worldwide. But if you look at the Nordics, we're actually doing what we said we would, which is we should be really, really proud of that.
As far as transitioning to a green
to green energy, and I know, and we can talk about that there are 2024 indications that there is a step back. But if you look at the big picture for Norway, for Sweden, for Denmark, we are on the right glide path. The EU publishes an annual paper that says what is the probability that you'll go wrong. And for Denmark, the probability is 26% that we won't meet our 2030 targets, which is super, super low. And for Sweden, it's something like that. I just saw it this morning, but I can't remember the number, so I don't want to quote it. But it's super positive. It's super positive. We are doing what we said we would. Now, Sweden had a short step back, and that's because the economy now all of a sudden is rising, and construction is also rising. And construction is one of the sectors that's very difficult to do in a sort of a non-carbon way, right? Because cement, concrete and so on are super carbon intensive. The construction machines, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But if we look aside from that, we are on the right path in the Nordics. Denmark had, ironically, a consumer-driven setback. airplane fuel grew 14% the first 6 months because everybody just started traveling, right? And again, here the Swedes can be proud because you guys invented the expression flyskam.
But I think we have less of that now. It's funny.
You have much less of that. And by the way, if and I don't want to speak negatively to your audience, but and you just axed your taxes on flights.
Yeah, exactly.
Not so good for the green transition. But no, I am positive. I said positive. I am positive by nature, but I am an optimist for the Nordics. Okay. Now, having said that, if you look at the numbers worldwide, energy consumption continues to grow. And it continues the growth. If you look at 23 over 22, 2/3 of the growth came from carbon fuel. We are burning more fuel and more coal and more natural gas than we ever have. There is no climate transition. There is no limiting this to 1.5 degree rise. We are going to be past that number in 2024. There is no doubt about that. So the question is, what now? And I don't think anybody has a good answer to that.
Yeah. How are you thinking? How are you hoping to?
So I don't have an answer,
no.
Right? To be very honest, and I don't think anyone has. But this is what fueled me also to want to work again. Because I'm studying these things and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking somebody needs to do something about it.
I mean, looking at that, because having studied, I assume meeting lots of other students. Most of them maybe younger than you are.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. And so,
what's your sort of feeling that? I mean, have you feeling that we can bring something from your industrial experience to do it into the green sector, or people? Just give me some.
So, if I can answer it in two ways.
Yeah.
One is in terms of being a student. I cannot emphasize enough the privilege that it is to be a student at the age of 50 plus.
Yeah.
Right? You come to this with an ability to distill lots of material, to get to the essence much faster. You have whatever discipline you've learned through working for 27 years, so on and so forth. It's amazing to be back on the school bench at this age, contrary to what many people would have believed. But I really cannot say this enough, okay? It's fantastic. And again, I'm super selective because what I'm looking for is as a business executive, right? So I don't need to understand this, but this actually has an impact on how this could work in a business, right? Super, super privileged. Now, the other thing is that in terms of applying what you're learning is and wanting to do this, I think that's not entirely dependent on me, right? Because I couldn't go out and start a solar company, right? I'd like to work in this transition. And I think also to an extent, it's yet to be proven if somebody wants to give me the chance to do that.
Yeah.
But yes, you can see the industrial rules, so on and so forth. We can talk about Northvolt, we can talk about better energy, we can talk about capital efficiency, not extending yourself. The problems at Northvolt has been described everywhere. It's about yields, it's about production volumes, it's about servicing your debt, all of those things. And those are problems that as an industry executives, this is what we do when we go to work. Of course it is, right? So yes, absolutely. I think so too. But I'm still bullish on the sector. And when I talk to headhunters, including like yourself, they're like, looking for a job in the green sector in 2025, that's a tough one. Yeah. And I'm like, I have time. I can study some more and so on and so forth. So I'm super bullish.
And when you talk to people, what signals are you getting and have you?
Unfortunately, a lot of the signals are the short-term signals, right? Yeah. Donald Trump, I think the middle of last week, said he hates windmills, right? Ørsted and Vestas stocks dropped 7-8% that day just because Trump said that he hates windmills, right? those things tend to create a lot of noise. But I think long term, there's no way out of those. There is no way.
So look, having spent time now, where do you think the future is? I mean, is it windmills, solar panels, or
yes,
what?
Yes. Yeah. If you look at, and it doesn't matter if it's the world or if it's just Europe, the amount of energy that we have even today that needs to be replaced by renewable energy sources is astronomical. You need windmills. You need solar panels. And I'm sorry to say, because I'm a climate hippie, but having studied this intensely for now a year, we're going to need nuclear power as well. It's just, there is no way. It's fossil or nuclear. That's it. You cannot build enough windmills. You don't have, or you are not willing to give up enough forests, farmland, and so on and so forth to make room for enough solar panels. So you're going to need some other clean source of energy, and it's going to have to be nuclear. There is no other way. And I know, and this is also what's exciting. There's lots of innovation. The big thing in solar panels is something that's called BI or BA, where it is building integrated. So it's part of the walls, it's part of the, could be part of the roof, and so on and so forth, right? So building integrated could be part of the windows and so on. Now, it doesn't have the efficiency of a solar farm, but these things can be used, can be applied on south-facing windows, for instance. BA is building attached, so you put it on a building. You ask that big warehouses, you ask that they put it on top. You've seen Tesla and also other charging operators are putting roofing over where their cars are charged, and they have solar panel on that. That's an example of building attached. So there's a lot happening in this area, and it's also really cool to see that there's still some innovation in this area as well. Okay. So I see all of this, and this is what fuels my optimism. But on a global level, we don't have a prayer's chance in hell of getting to anything that looks like climate neutral by any.
No. I mean, well, my take on the current situation, if you sort of talk to people, is that there seems to be, and I'm not saying I have but just having listened and is that one of the things that happened over the last 6 months has been that a lot of, and this was the first time I said this, but still it's worth repeating, that a lot of green projects have sort of gone commercially badly.
Yeah.
Whatever you call the green project. I mean, and Northwood, of course, Northwood being the biggest example, but there seems to be a lot of others. That's almost like there's been a lot of sort of, we've got to do this, and there perhaps hasn't been enough sort of due diligence in the, is this ever going to be commercial? Can we do this? Are we there yet?
Yeah.
And then that has created a backlash now that suddenly nobody's just doing anything. Or they're just waiting. And
I completely agree. But going back to the beginning of our conversation, think about Netscape.
Yeah.
We all use that browser, right? Think about, and all the young people listening to your podcast, they'll have no idea what we're talking about, right? but at the dawn of the industry that I've proudly been part of now for 27 years, we had Netscape, we had Yahoo, we had AOL, we had Sun Microsystems, right? There's a lot of companies that did exactly what you've just described, CJ, right? So they overextended themselves. They thought, Sun Microsystems, with that they had die-hard customers that loved that, right? But the separation of operating system and hardware, it just came as a wave. And it nearly killed Apple, by the way, right? And so, again, I think that's part of a natural cycle. The big question is, what do we need to learn from that?
Yeah.
And I think it was in your observation that they've overextended themselves, right? They've simply overextended themselves. This is what I call capital efficiency, right? They borrow all of this money, they assume all of this debt, and then the projects get delayed or demand is a little late in picking up, and therefore they need to go into reconstruction because somebody's knocking on their door and said, sorry, you missed a payment here, right? And I think, and even in networking, remember, there used to be Cisco, there used to be Nortel in Canada. They went bankrupt, right? So this is part of the normal business cycle.
And looking where you are now, having spent all this time, thinking about where the green transition is going to go and thinking about your personal future career, where would you like to put your time and money? I think where would sort of be the...
If you're going to make a big difference, what are the sectors that really need green energy, right? That's the question I've been asking myself. Now, if through a magic wand I could find something that could help the planes, I would probably do that, but there is no magic wand there. And there are some super bright people working on sustainable aviation fuel, as they call it. But that's not what appeals to me. The green energy part, the fastest growing segment that is consuming the most energy is data centers.
This is interesting.
Part of the digital infrastructure. Last year, a report came out, said that they are spending about 4% of global energy is going to data centers. The Guardian came out with a report that said that they believe that number, or in big articles, said that they believe that number is probably significantly underestimated, and therefore the carbon emissions from those sectors are also significantly underestimated. There could be some truth to that. I don't know for sure. But if you could help, because I understand digital infrastructure, if you could help the data centers get green energy, that could really, really help.
And do you have any house there? Do you see anybody who's doing well or sort of?
What they have, let me answer that before I get to your. What they have is they have a super, super willingness to be green. That's why...
And they have the money as well, of course.
They have the money and they're willing to be green. That's part of why this region is growing with the hyperscalers more so than other regions, because we have lots of green energy, we're geologically stable and some other things like that. But stable supply, green energy, obviously we're very digital in this region and so on. So it's not just that, but the green energy means something to these guys, okay? So they want it and they want a lot of it. And I think that's super attractive. How can this be done? Again, we've talked about this. It's solar, it's wind, and so on and so forth. What we have to remember is where these guys can go wrong is their backup systems are diesel generators. And now there's a lot happening with battery storage, BESS, battery electric storage systems. So BESS systems are starting to prove themselves in on a very, very large scale. And therefore, if there is a critical failure on the grid, they can now spend batteries and still be green, because you can charge the batteries at night when there's lots of wind, but not a lot of consumption. There's not a lot of cooling needed at night, blah, blah, blah. So these guys are really thinking about this stuff, and that's super important to keep in mind, okay? So when you read the reports that, oh, but we should all stop watching Netflix, we should stop watching TikTok because that's driving. Yes, but these guys are actually thinking the green transition in from the beginning. And I think we should be inspired by that, quite frankly.
What job would you like to have now? This is this is an ad, but also what? How you've sort of gone about it? Have you, apart from studying, it's interesting. Is you're sort of making this career change.
Yeah.
Apart from studying, what have you been doing?
So let's start backwards. It still remains to whether the bet will ultimately succeed, right? Pay off, if you like. I'm going about it just talking to lots of people, just networking, just expressing interests, and being completely honest about the fact that I'm 50 plus and that I'm doing a transition and that it's late and so on and so forth. But on the flip side of that, I obviously have lots and lots and lots of miles in my legs, if you like. I've seen a lot. And if people are interested in the overlap between the skills that I do have and have proved, and the fact that I'm a newbie, I don't want to say green, but I'm a newbie.
Of course, an obvious parallel with your career is, of course, all the building of electrical infrastructure.
Yeah,
I mean that's what you've been doing. But different.
Yeah,
and then of course handling all the customers, and that all of these companies have these problems. They don't have an idea how to. To me, there's a classic parallel with sort of all the sort of the ones who are building the charging posts and all this. It's just exactly the same as telco was like 15 years ago.
and think, so not only that, but think about the last 5 or 10 people that you've had in this chair.
Yeah.
Right? PostNord Strålfors, you had, I forget her name, but she was talking about how the postal service has gone digital.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, every low-tech sector is getting, and I don't want to say high-tech, but I'm not saying low-tech is going high-tech. That would be too easy, right? Every low-tech sector is getting digital, right? The CEO of Cognic walked through what it takes to put a camera and a sensing system in a car, right? Sitting in this very chair. And I think, quite frankly, we're going to see that everywhere. Also in the green transition. Power management system, sensors everywhere, optimizing the grid for frequency, for stability, so on and so forth, right? And as you said, this is stuff that I've done before, both because I've worked for a utility, but also because I've done this in the tech sector. So for sure, this is going to, whether I'm going to join this transition or not, the digital transformation of the green energy sector, so to speak, is something that we should all be inspired by.
And so finally then, what do you sort of, is there anything you'd like to, what do you sort of listen, having spent so time now thinking about how to get new information, what would you like to share that you sort of listen, read, that you good things to follow?
So I know you were going to ask, what podcasts are you listening to, right? And I have to say quite honestly, I'm not listening to podcasts because I'm in the super, super privileged situation that as a student, I can go back and read the original studies, right? I have time. So I try really to take the original, not this is how somebody translated it for a podcast, or not how somebody described it in the media, because they often get it wrong, as we already discussed. I'm going back and I'm reading the original research, which I think has really been a great experience, quite frankly. And
any particular thing you'd say, this book or this thing really changed my view of the world?
No, if I was going to say to anyone who is thinking about making a transition, there is a great podcast with Andrew Huberman and a Jungian therapist called James Hollis, which totally blew my mind on my inner journey.
Okay, good. That's good. That's
good
tip.
It's all about finding sort of your next mission, but in service of others. Like, forget what you want to do. Like, of course you need to do it, but like, that's not important.
I totally agree with that. I think that this whole thing sort of, what am I going to do about myself? I think it's a dead end. It's a lot. I think you're completely right about that.
And just the way he has a way with words that's far superior to how I could describe it. But this notion of being in service of others, really,
I think that's going to make your life so much more fun.
Yes,
it's going to be so much better.
And now we talked about the hardships of being in IT, the hardships of being in tech, and obviously the hardships along the way being in green transition. But it has to be fun. It has to be fun. There is lots of fun to be had on this journey. I am certain of that.
And what about finally? Do you have any guests in the pod? Anybody you think we should bring on the pod? Anyone you'd like to listen to?
I think it would be interesting if this podcast is well received. It would actually be interesting to take MJ.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a very good point.
Who is now continuing on the journey, right? She's the fresh eyes who, is continuing the work I did in Global Connect. So it would be super interesting to get her, not because I've been here, but also because Global Connect touches more than half of all the people listening to this podcast, right? Yeah. They have 25 data centers. They have more fiber kilometers than anybody else in the region. They carry half of the internet traffic. So what she is doing is impacting everybody that's listening to this.
That's a good point. MJ, you're on the. You should make an intro, Jacob. This is very good. So I think we're done.
Yes.
How did you experience it?
No, I think it was a lot of fun.